Welcome to my second video in the Painting Space Crusade series, where we're going to be painting up this Genestealer using the classic scheme from the box art. I think it looks alright, not bad, pretty good tabletop standard, and I was going to show you what paints we used for the project. A simple colour scheme. The Carapace is going to be using a dark blue, so I've got Imperial blue, Game Air, Hydra Turquoise from Army Painter, but you could use any turquoise really, and Pallid Wych Flesh, so just a very, very light colour. You could just use a white if you haven't got Pallid Wych Flesh. It's basically just to highlight up the turquoise. For these purpley areas, we're using just two paints, Magenta and Squid Pink. A real good combination. I love those. It's a nice colour, the Magenta. For the claws, nice easy combination of black and German grey, and then we add white for the highlights. And your classic Khorne Red, Mephiston Red, Evil Sunz Scarlet for the red areas on the model, which is basically just his tongue. So I'd say about 90% of this model is painted with these brushes here, so real cheap old brushes, and we're going to use a stippling approach on a lot of this, so pretty easy. Apart from the eyes and the teeth, which you could totally leave out if you're just doing tabletop quality, you don't need a fine brush. So if you're enjoying these Space Crusade videos, leave me a comment, let me know, consider subscribing and give us a like at the end of the video when you've watched it. But let's crack on with this guy now. As promised, we're going to start off with the Imperial Blue Game Air paint, the Army Painter Hydra Turquoise, and Pallid Wych Flesh. And we're going to be using a really big, old, crusty brush, kind of thing from a children's paint set. Starting off with some of the Imperial Blue, we're just going to get some on the brush, wipe most of it off, and we're going to stipple it pretty much all over the model. The model's primed in Vallejo Surface Primer Polyurethane Black. You could prime it in any black colour, it wouldn't make much difference. So with this blue paint, the idea is to provide a good sort of base layer, but it's not meant to be like a solid base coat. We want a lot of the black still showing underneath the model, because we're going for a paint scheme which is like the Alien off of the Alien film, where it's like a bluey black carapace. You can just see there the comparison with once we've done a few layers of the blue stippling. And mix in a little bit of the Hydra Turquoise and do the same kind of thing. When we use the first blue, the Imperial Blue, which is very dark, we had to go from above but also from about 90 degrees and also a little bit underneath the model. If you want it fully black underneath, then don't worry about painting underneath. But with this Hydra Turquoise and Imperial Blue mix, we're going to go mainly from above. Had a little bit too much of my brush at one point there, which you saw. It's kind of totally fine as long as the paint's thinned a little bit, which it is. We're going to move over to a sort of a sharper brush. It's not a sharper brush. You can see that it's still very ratty. But that's what we want. We want all these little individual hairs on the brush, dropping bits of paint in kind of like random places. And the idea is to give a mottled texture to the carapace once it's done. So I'm kind of thinking that this is going to be a model that is lit from above. So most of the lighter colours will be done from above, but because of the style of the model where it's sort of like leaning forward, you're going to need to put, like I said earlier, you're going to need to put some of the blues underneath it as well. And when we mix in a bit of the Pallid Wych Flesh, we're going to put less of the stippling on the model, and really this is only going to go from above. You can see I'm also using it to start lightening up the area, which is going to be the purpley bit, sort of outside of his like armor carapace. Yeah, I lost a little bit of footage here, so to bear with me a second. Now we're going in with Magenta. It's almost straight out of the pot. I just basically wet the brush to provide it to make it thin down a little bit, and you can see that I've already sort of stippled, dry brushed that on. I dry brushed the bits where you got ridges across the back, and I've stippled it onto the hands. Using a slightly smaller brush now. Again, it's an old brush, it's sort of flattened off a bit, but you do need a bit more control to get into these smaller areas. And it is more of a dry brush now when we're going into those smaller areas, especially over the, like I said, the rigid, the parts where there's like sort of ridges. If you stippled it, you'd get a lot of the purple into the grooves, which we want to stay sort of like almost black. You know, we're not being too precious about this paint job. We want it to look, like I said, mottled, kind of sort of like natural looking, rather than sort of painted, really solid colours. As we mix a bit of the squid pink in, we're going to use a definite dry brush stroke now on the ridged areas, and we're going to use a stippling sort of brush motion on the flatter areas like the head. But we definitely want to add a bit more pink into that. The idea on the head is I want it to go from like pink on the face through to the blue of the carapace without having to do any kind of like, you know, proper difficult blending. And we're just going to move on up through the brightness now using squid pink on its own. Again, kind of like a dry brush, but you know, pretty controlled now. Just hitting the areas we want to be lighter. You know, around the face, the knuckles, that kind of thing. Now, if you don't like the kind of like dry brushy look, which can look a bit chalky, then maybe this paint job isn't for you, but most of that sort of scratchy, almost chalky look on the carapace and on the head is kind of what I was going for. And we're going to mix up an oil wash now using, you know, you can use any oil paint, but it's magenta we're using. You can see the sort of consistency that I'm getting here, and I'm using odourless thinners, which I'd recommend just from a quality of life perspective, really. You can see it's not super thin, but it's not thick either. It is flowing into the recesses, and we're going to paint this all over the model. I'm sorry I didn't mention that we were going to use oil wash when I introduced the paint, so I had it to one side. It wasn't intentional. And we're going to clean the brush with odourless thinners and use it to take off some of the excess. In particular, I don't want too much of the magenta drying on the blue carapace, but I do want some. So I dried it off with a hairdryer. So you know, only took a minute to dry it off. So it won't be completely cured, but it's pretty dry. And we're going to use a cotton bud soaked in some of the odourless thinners. We're going to roll off the magenta oil paint wash over the areas that we want to be more highlighted. So on those rigid areas of the, I don't know what it is exactly, the flesh that's showing through the carapace, I'm not really sure what it is exactly. And we're going to also roll it off on some of the blue carapace areas. What you'll find though is that no matter how much you roll off, that magenta will have stained the whole of the model a little bit, which is totally fine. It's what I want. I want even the blue to have a little bit of the magenta warmth so that it all kind of blends in together. Yeah, we're not using an airbrush when we're painting up this Space Crusade set, so we're going to mix some matte varnish with some thinners and just paint it on. Onto the claws now. I really fancied them being kind of like a blacky grey colour. I didn't want them to be brown. I'm not sure if that was a good decision or not. It might look more interesting if they were like a browny bone colour, but you know, you could paint them browny bone colour if you fancy. While we've got the black on the brush, we're just going to paint a little bit between the fingers where the magenta was the magenta wash that is was a little bit too magenta-y. I want it to be darker between the fingers. Just blocking in some German grey there at the carapace end of the claws. What we're going for is a lighter colour towards the carapace and darker towards the end of the claws. Same thing with the German grey. We're going to use it to highlight the, not fingernails, the claws on the hands and the claws on the feet and the claws on, not the claws, the spiky bits on the back of the back of the legs down near where his Achilles would be if he had a human anatomy. So we're adding in a little tiny bit of the Pallid Wych flesh into the German grey. You know, you could just use white if you haven't got the Pallid Wych flesh. It's totally fine. Pallid Wych flesh is it's like slightly warm off-white, but you know, not like an ivory. It's like very, very slightly warm. And we're going to block that in sort of again closer to the carapace. Then use a like a very thinned down mix of that to glaze back into the mid-tone of that, which is the German grey. Spend a little bit of a while on these claws, going back and forward with the black and the German grey and the lighter German grey mix, starting with a little bit of just sort of like normal glaze blending, and then I lost some more footage, so you can see that I've kind of got to a point where the claws are kind of pretty much painted, including using a little bit of the black paint to add some texture along the claws. And we're going to skip onto the tongue here, but we will come back to the claws before the end. So the tongue's a real straightforward case of Khorne Red base, work up through Mephiston Red, and then Wild Rider Red towards the tip of the tongue. And we paint the eyes with the either a white paint, or I use the Pallid Wych flesh to make them nice and bright when we add the Mephiston Red over the top. I did go back in and repaint them white and then paint them again with Wild Rider Red because I wanted them to be a little bit brighter. Just using a glaze of the magenta paint here now, not the oil paint, the actual magenta, the model colour magenta paint, just to make the face a little bit purpler, or say the face, the top of the head. And then using it as well to darken up the bits between the knuckles, so just to have a bit more contrast between the knuckles, which are lighter, and the rest of the fingers, which would be a little bit more magenta-y, if that's a word. Also using that glaze to blend in the highlight on the back there. You know, you don't really need to do any of this stuff if you just want it as a tabletop quality model. I think the stippling's added some real cool sort of texture effect. You know, it's not going to win any golden demons or anything like that, but you know, for a paint job that you can do in, you know, like a hour or two, you know, I think it's going to look good on the tabletop. Mixing a bit of the Pallid Wych flesh into the Hydra Turquoise now. We'd already had a bit of a highlight on the ends of those carapace pieces when we were doing the stippling, but I wanted the highlights to be a little bit more blue, just to add a bit of differentiation really between the highlights on the purpley areas. Again, you know, you can skip this part if you haven't got as much time. Using that same colour to add a little bit of texture on the head, so bringing the highlighted blue carapace onto the purple of the head. Yeah, this guy's ready for the tabletop now. Now that's a good indication of what actually happens in the game. If you're watching this video, you've probably played the game, but yeah, watch out if you're a Marine player. So we're going to just paint the base with model colour silver, really pretty much the best silver acrylic paint you can get, as far as I've used myself. Kind of just doing like an overbrush, so kind of really just a dry brush with a bit extra paint. And that's all we're going to do on that silver. I might paint the base. I might put some colours on the base at some point, but I want to wait till I've painted up the whole set to see what it looks like first. And we're going to edge the rim with German grey. Going back in now just to tidy up these claws with some glazes of black German grey and the mixture of German grey and Pallid Wych flesh. Mainly using the German grey mid-tone just to sort of like blend everything together. Felt like the face needed a little bit more of a highlight, so we're going in with some Squid pink and a small brush. So this is really the only bit that's using a real fine detail brush. other than the eyes and the teeth, that is, of which I've already painted. That was another bit that got lost off the footage. Going to use a bit of that Squid pink to add a little bit of texture above those ridges on the nose there as well. So yeah, talking about the lost footage, it was because I was doing a 2-camera setup, trying to have the wet palette on screen at the same time. So got to get a little bit better at managing when one camera's running out of runtime as opposed to the other one. But hopefully it's useful having that little window within a window at the top there. Let me know what you think about that. If it's really not useful, I might skip it. Just highlighting a few more bits of the face here with the Squid pink. And the neck as well, we're going to highlight that. So, maybe in real life it wouldn't be highlighted underneath there with his body crouched over, but I'm not that fussed about it being, really true to life. It is an alien whose main purpose is to go after space marines and suck their stuff out of them. Just using a bit of the Pallid witch flesh to highlight the claws. The model is really good for its age, but these claws are a little bit soft. They're, they don't look very sharp, so highlighting them, like edge highlighting them, isn't that easy. So I took some of the magenta oil wash off earlier, and now the model's almost finished. I feel like I want some parts of the carapace to be a little bit more magenta-y to match, or to sort of blend in a bit better with the hands and the stuff on the back and the head. So real simple case of just using a really thin down glaze of magenta just to bring those areas back towards the magenta, basically. Real straightforward. When I say glaze, it's probably mixed about sort of 2 or 3 parts water to 1 part magenta. And I'm also, to sort of finish off the model, putting in a little bit of magenta into the Wild Rider Red, just to make the tongue fit in with the rest of the model. Let's have a look at a few pictures of this guy. Now he's finished. On the gaming board as well. Let me know what you think about this. The idea of my channel is really to get stuff painted to, decent standard that you'd be happy to put them on the tabletop and play games. Partly as a motivation for myself to get all my stuff finished and painted, and partly because, hopefully it'll help you guys out there, get projects done. That's really the aim. So this is, reasonably fast paint job on this. Let me know what you think about it, whether you think it'd be worth spending a bit longer and being more precise with the stippling at the start, whether you think the stippling technique kind of just looks a bit rubbish overall, or whether you think it looks really good. I find it really hard to look at my own finished models at the end and really sort of properly evaluate them, because I've spent the time painting them. So, I would appreciate if people, let me know what you think. Even if you think it looks rubbish, say it in a reasonably nice way and I'll be fine with that, honest. I'm not sure which model we're going to paint up next. It won't be one of the Marines, because I'm waiting on some gold paint for those guys. So it's probably going to be some more of the bad guys. So stay tuned for that. If you're not subscribed, but you've waited all the way to the end here, do subscribe, leave me a thumbs up if you like the video, and watch the next one as well. See you later.